Welcome to another Create Greg video. My name is Greg, and in today's episode I would love to talk about Sony a7c, the one which didn't get enough attention in my opinion, comparing to Sony a7S3, which we've been all waiting for 5 years, I believe. And don't get me wrong, Sony a7S3 looks like an amazing camera, but I decided to save some money and invest in Sony a7c, and I've been using this one for the last 2 months, so I decided to share my thoughts with you, some practical aspects of using this camera and where it's worth it to save money or maybe add some more, actually twice more, and buy better Sony a7S3. I jotted down some pros and cons to be sure not forget to mention everything, what I've learned and what I believe is practical and good to know about this lovely tiny camera. Let's dive into that. Small form factor, which I prefer. There is pros and cons with the small factor itself. If I'm going for a professional shoot, bringing the smaller camera might not be encouraging for my clients, saying like, we pay a lot of money and you're bringing this tiny iPhone-alike camera, which this one might backfire on you. But if we put this one thing aside, it's far better to travel with this camera. There is certain solution when you can actually mount to your belt, very flexible, take less space in your backpack, very good for photography, videography. Me personally, using big and chunky camera on commercial shoot, yeah, why not? But using them on a daily basis for vlogging, for instance, smaller form factor wins for me every single time. The second and most awaited for years feature in Sony DSLR cameras was side flip screen. I had the previous one, which was APS-C Sony 6400, I believe, and this one have a top flip up screen, which was good enough for me. However, the side one I've never used before. It's superb and makes your life far much easier, not just only for vlogging, but you can get easier different angles when you shoot, like from the low angle, or if you go to shoot from the top. You can literally see it from everywhere, so it makes your life far much easier. Small but very important things. If we talk about the microphone jack, it's lovely placed on the left side on the top, which will not obstruct the monitor. So you can connect the jack easily and you can use for vlogging. It's a small thing, but it's very useful and make your life more easier. Let's talk about other pros of this camera. Real-time track autofocus. I'm a bit of old-fashioned and I always believe like real focus is manual focus, because if you want to be a filmmaker you have to know how to do it manually, but that's the past. Autofocus in this camera, and actually in the recent Sony cameras, it's superb. Canon was famous for the last few years for having great autofocus, and Sony was lacking behind them, but eventually they fixed that, and this one make your life so much easier. When shooting like that in a vlogging style or even shooting commercially, it just makes your life easier if you're shooting on your own. You can rely on that autofocus and put all your attention in the right framing. Genuinely, I think it's one of the coolest features of this camera. And comparing it to Sony a7 III, which is actually very similar camera to this one, it feels like this one would be an upgrade to Sony a7 III. It looks like they took the best features from that camera, get the smaller form factor and put everything inside, plus some bonuses like adjustable transition speed and responsiveness of autofocus. With the Sony a7 III, which I didn't use in practice, got a good reputation with autofocus, but this one with extra function which you can adjust precisely how responsive autofocus supposed to be and how quickly supposed to go from one position to another one. Superb solution again. Let's move on to another pros, new bigger Sony Z series batteries. If you've been ever shooting on Sony a7C and cameras with these small Sony batteries, you knew how painful it is, how many batteries you have to carry with you for shooting. They are not as bad as people say, but with this one, they just make your life easier because you need less of them. You can shoot longer with this camera, and glad to see that Sony listened to users and just made the bigger, better batteries. No record limit. Some cameras, they've got like 30 minutes record limit, so if you're into interviews and you want to run your camera all the time and then chop the interview, you can do with this camera, no issues at all. Me personally, I don't try to run anything for 30 minutes. My practical point of view on that, what if you run an interview and the file was corrupted? You will lose the whole one. So every time when I try to record interview or something, I try to break my clips in order if there was some issue with one of them, I'm not going to lose the whole footage, just maybe the single piece. It's my personal opinion. It never happened to me, but better safe than sorry, I believe. Custom name for video files. Like no big deal, but if you've got two of these cameras, for instance, which is very handy, you can name each of the files separately. You can choose how they're supposed to be numbered. Is it continuous or resetting from every single time? Small things, but very useful. Once you got the file from the camera, you know which camera is that. They are nicely labeled. They've got the numbers you wanted them to have. Small, but cool. No issue with overheating. Apparently there are some brands and some camera models that struggle with that. This one doesn't have it at all. Let's talk about my favorite feature of this camera, which is 6K sensor. And I want to tell you right off the bat, it's not 6K camera, it's not 8K camera, because we don't need them. But you can record 4K in this camera with the 6K sensor because it's super sampling from 6K to 4K. It sounds maybe like a no big deal, but if you ever record in 4K and then convert the footage to 1080, which I do on a daily basis, even if I need 1080, I will shoot in 4K because I will get the better quality of the picture, and you can use, clear digital zoom. And because the sensor is 6K, you can use in-camera clear image zoom, which is superb function. 6K sensor, you can zoom in to 4K without losing quality. It translates into like 1.5 zoom, which is beneficial for prime lenses. Now we can change this video to the whole conversation, what is better, prime lenses or zoom lenses. Both have pros and cons. In general, zoom lenses are more flexible, faster to work with, but not as good as prime lenses. It's just generalization, but putting this subject on the side, I prefer to shoot with prime lenses. And when I shoot, for instance, commercially, and there's not enough time to move the camera closer, I would like to time the frame, you can just click into clear image zoom, bump 1.1, 1.5 maximum, get the better framing, off you go without losing quality. Don't do it very often, but when the speed is at premium, super solution and 6K super sampling to 4K give you better quality of the image itself. Another cool things with this camera is HLG hybrid low gamma. I don't know too much about it. I haven't used it enough. I didn't educate myself. I know it's like future-proof standard created by enhanced HDR. Don't know too much about it. Don't want to tell something which is not true. Once I educate myself, I'll actually stop talking about HLG. But you have it and it can be useful. S-Log 2. Previous cameras had the S-Log 2 and actually this one has S-Log 3, but there is no use of S-Log 3 because unfortunately this camera is still 8-bit 420. Nothing is perfect and that's the con of this camera, but S-Log 2 can do the job. And what's the cool with this camera? The S-Log 2 starts at ISO 500 comparing to Sony a7c where it started at 800 and a7S2 where it started at 1600. So lower ISO, less of a noise when you use S-Log. Always good. Small improvement, but still useful for everyone like me shooting most of the time S-Log 2 with this. Like pretty much with every Sony DSLR camera, good low light performance, is a full frame sensor, so automatically it gives you good performance. And actually Sony is famous for having, I would say boldly, the best low light performance from all DSLRs. The technology, which it's cool. And I remember when I got my first A7S2 and it was mind-blowing how great it was in low light. Every next generation of the camera, they improve a bit of it, and this one has the same sensor as A7 III, which I mentioned, which is cool. Let's move on. 5-axis image stabilization built-in, very useful function. This one does not perform as good as competitor one, but it's still good to have it. I've been actually trying to buy lenses with built-in stabilization because one of my previous cameras, Sony 6400, didn't have it. So this one has it, superb. And the cool thing about it, even if the stabilization is not as good as competitors, you can get the data from gyroscope and use Sony software, Catalyst, I believe, to stabilize the footage in post-production based on data from gyroscope. So it will be more precise than the random stabilization effect in Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve. Comparing to Sony a7 III, they improve color scheme rendering, which Sony is not the best at comparing to Canon. Everyone loves Canon way of interpreting colors, how they render a color scheme. It's never been a huge issue for me, but this one improved to previous one. And yeah, that's a good one. Better noise performance to a7 III, so it's still the same sensor, but apparently they improve it. I have not used the a7 III, but it's apparently better. Let's trust them, and yeah, cool. The last thing which is good about this camera is the price. Okay, price could be lower as a lot of people stated in the review of this camera. It's a bit of less than Sony a7 III and it costs in UK, according to Sony.co.uk website, £1,900, and in the USA it's 1,800 USA dollars. Comparing this one to Sony a7S III, in UK it's exactly twice more expensive Sony a7S III, and in the USA it's almost twice more expensive. And that for me was significant factor buying on this one camera. Before we move to cons, that's my point of view on spending money on equipment. I'm more than happy to buy the latest cameras, buy Epic Red cameras, all the bits and pieces, the most expensive lenses. But from practical business point of view, there's never-ending story with spending money on equipment, and you cannot build successful business putting money all the time in equipment. If you can afford it, superb, congratulations. For me, I would rather buy good enough equipment and use rest of that money to put back into business, put back into business development, into promoting business. And me thinking, okay, I can get one Sony a7S3, or I can have actually for the half of the price Sony a7c, which is a bit of older, not as good as Sony a7S3, but for the price of Sony a7S3, I can have two of these cameras, which for me was a deal breaker. Because when I go to shoot interview, I can have two cameras shooting two angles. If I'm going to shoot commercially with two cameras, guess what if something happened to one of them? I'm like, drop it, never happened to me, but can happen. The other things bad happened to my camera, but that's the story for another video. You've got redundancy plan. You've got two cameras. Of course, it would be cool to have a7S3 twice, but then we go to almost £8,000 price tag. So having this one, which is good enough for YouTube, most of the commercial work still in 2021, if the client needs really that quality of high-end camera, I will incorporate that into budget and rent that camera for YouTube and the YouTube compressions and using it on a daily basis. This one works for me like a charm, and having two of them, ooh, that's the coolest part. So we arrive at the moment when it's time to move to cons of this camera. So this part is for all Canon shooters to prove you that you made the good decision staying with Canon, or for everyone who bought Sony a7S3 to say like, I knew that's cons, like it's not worth it to buy it. Let's walk you through the cons I found, and I think they are worth to mention. Not enough customizable buttons. It is an issue. Because of small form factor, they didn't incorporate a lot of additional C1, C2, C3 buttons, which you can find in A7S line. They're always useful. There's a lot of function you can add to it. The good news is you can still program the buttons at the back, which can save the day. I did it, I work around it, how to customize a menu to work for me. It's not ideal, but definitely you can work around it. Not fully functional touchscreen. With the Sony a7S3, they made this new menu which looks superb, and apparently it's better than all this old clunky menu, and it's fully touchscreen. This one is touchscreen as well, and actually it's good, because the most important function for me, it's on the touch, namely when you shoot in autofocus mode, you can rack focus between the positions by touching them on the screen, which is good enough for me. If you would like to scroll through menu or choose the function, you cannot do it. You still need to use joystick. Not ideal, but if it would be ideal, why would you pay extra for S series? The biggest issue for me, if I could change and ask for one thing to be in this camera, it would be 60 frames per second in 4K. You cannot find it. Of course, it's 1080, but not in 4K. There was the function I was missing in A7S2, which I've been using for many years. You can super scale the image to 4K in post-production. It works. It encouraged me to shoot more in 24, not rely on 60 frames per second. Because you don't have 60 frames per second, so you cannot shoot 120 frames per second in 4K as you can shoot in Sony a7S. 3 things worth to mention to shoot in 120 frames per second in 4K. You need CF fast cards, which are very expensive, and it will get us to another important thing which is missing from this camera. It's not 10-bit 422 as Sony a7S III line. It's unfortunately 8-bit 420, which causes problem in post-production, especially when you're trying to push color grading because it's not enough information and it can cause artifacts. Ideally, if you could record in 10-bit 422 as Sony a7S III, but yeah, let's remember it's half of the price. And fun fact to mention, a lot of people decided to pay extra premium and have this option in Sony a7S III to shoot 10-bit 120 frames per second in 4K. First, you need to spend extra money on CFast cards. The file size are bigger, so you have to invest in additional storage to keep all that files for post-production. The file size are more cumbersome to edit, so you need to have very powerful computer for editing. So a lot of people have that option, but they don't use it on a daily basis, shooting still in 8-bit or limiting themselves to sometimes 1080 to make your life easier in post-production. So my question is, why would you spend that extra money for that function? Okay, if you need them, you can use them, that's the fact, but is it worth it, double the price? You have to answer yourself. Rolling shutter. I think it's issue for a lot of these DSLR cameras. In Sony a7S III, I've seen they improve it, and there's a lot of people who gave the very good feedback with this camera. This one is the same as a7 III. Fun fact, I recently watched some high-end Hollywood production and I've noticed rolling shutter in one of their camera movements, which of course they've got some expensive high-end cameras, but the rolling shutter was there. So that's the technical limitation. Some of cameras have more of it, some of them less. We have to live with that. Just don't pan left and right as quick as possible and you will be good with that. Image stabilization not as good as a7S III and competitors. Yeah, that's the fact, but as I mentioned previously, you can pull the data from gyroscope and use Sony software to stabilize in post-production. Of course, it's another step which will take time, but if you got critical shots which you need to stabilize, it's doable. So good to know that, and yeah, you can work around it. And the last thing, which is pretty nasty and important to mention, the viewfinder is very bad. And my question which will follow, who the hell uses viewfinder to shoot video? Okay, if you use it, please drop down in comments or send me the link to video how you use it. I don't even use once. I think if you're into photography, you will need the viewfinder, but probably you would look into different camera like Sony R series. To be honest, I would be happy if they remove it and maybe add some button. I know there is a use in viewfinders in high-end cameras, but with the form factor of DSLR, you can shoot with the viewfinder in such a small form factor. So don't care about it at all. If there's issue or need for someone to have a viewfinder, this one is pretty bad, but it's usable. So no big deal about it, at least from my point of view. And yes, we arrived to the end of my pros and cons of Sony a7c. It's up to you whether you like it or not. I hope what I share with you will help you to make a better decision whether take it or not, add extra money to go for some other camera. That was the whole idea behind this video. Thanks for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed, thumbs up. If you get any question or something wasn't certain, drop them down in comments. Promise to answer all of them. If you didn't like it at all, I'm flattered you got to this point, and I got good news for you. I'm going to record another video and you might like this one. So despite the fact you didn't like it, you can subscribe and see whether the next one will resonate with you. If not, you can always unsubscribe. So guys, thank you for watching and until next one. You can super sample from 6K into 4K, which means you will read down the data from a smaller part of the sensor, which means you can connect APS-C lenses. You've got the option into menu whether you want to have the full readout, 6K super sample into 4K, or just from the 4K, which will allow you to use your Sony E-mount full frame lenses as well as APS-C. There's a company called Sirui, and they created recently very popular anamorphic lenses, very affordable. The drawback with this one, they are just only for APS-C sensors. With this one being full frame with the option to switch to APS-C readout from the sensor, you can use them easily. So